recently had a conversation come up, and it's been coming up across multiple platforms and with current students, with potential students in clinic scenarios, and I just wanted to share it real quickly before I head out on the road to another clinic. One of the things that I think is interesting is that the more that people become available to acknowledge horse behavior and to recognize that there is a very clear fork in the road in the difference between the I wants and the demands of this is to be emotionally satisfying for me, and so whatever it takes to make that happen we impose upon the horse, versus those people who are acknowledging what the horse is experiencing during the interaction. And a client who has several horses who's worked with me over the last few years has had a progression, and I call it Pandora's box. And what I mean by this is many times we are starting off with a horse and we might want to do better by the horse. We might want to refine our education, help that horse. Maybe the horse has been through some troubling scenarios with humans, maybe has trauma, maybe just experience, but we just want quality of life. Whatever the case may be, the more that we start to learn how to communicate with that horse in a manner that has value to the horse, and we create a safe space for that horse, so that during our interaction, the horse is not in a constantly mentally defensive, anticipative, tension-filled state, the more we start to see behaviors change in the horse. And so a lot of times the things that we are thinking in the sense of, I know my horse, I know how my horse will respond, we start seeing new behaviors come out. The horse becomes more expressive, maybe things that the horse once seemed okay with, they start to become resistant about, and I see this consistently over the years, where when you are in this progression, and it is a progression, in the journey of horsemanship and improving our refinement and understanding, to improve the quality of partnership with the horse, well, we have to recognize, and for a lot of horses there's what I call a purging period, meaning that for however many years that they have had to contain to a certain degree, some horses it's very severe, other horses not so much, any sort of anticipation, fear, or defensiveness. But because of the human way of interaction, that horse has had to contain his concern or contain his fleeing, avoidant behaviors, because the human imposed constant and pressure to make it work, that when we start to say, hey, I'm creating a safe space, you can communicate whatever you're experiencing in this moment, there's a lot of purging that needs to go on. And sometimes it's short little bursts, sometimes it's ongoing full-on meltdowns, but as I remind people, we are embracing the tantrum, but we're helping the horse get to the other side. And this is the big piece that's missed, where a lot of times people start to see horses melt down mentally, emotionally, physically, and the human goes, this doesn't feel good to me, and so the human winds up bailing on the communication. That's a whole other side tangent. So anyways, in this journey of helping these horses be able to let go of past things that have been taught to them, whether it was intentional or not by the human experience and interactions, we wind up seeing purging. And so we call it opening Pandora's box, because nobody really knows how much these horses have to let out. Most of these horses have a history that is unknown or unfamiliar, or even if previous owners told us what happened, maybe that's not how the horse interpreted or experienced what has happened in his education, training, competition, trail riding, whatever his life might have been. So back to the conversation with, people recently, where we're opening Pandora's box, they're seeing different behaviors with their horses. But one person in particular who has worked with me, like I mentioned, for a few years, had mentioned how this horse, who had literally thousands of miles ridden on him, he had been to all kinds of competitions, both with adults, with children, a variety of competitions. He had been eventually a therapy horse. I mean, he had been exposed to everything, hauled to tons of places and so on. And when I met him, he was very anticipative. He was mouthy, he was biting, he was pushy, he would shake when he saw a saddle, and yet for all of the different people that had handled and interacted with this horse, he seemed to be a, we'll say, success, meaning he gave the human what the human demanded of him. What wasn't acknowledged was how not okay he was, despite his, quote, willingness to go along or comply. And this is something that's very hard for people to see. And so as his current owner is trying to, or has been trying to help him create this safe space for him, he's going through this purging. The other day, she had the vet out and, looking at his physical health. He's an older horse at this point. And of course, all the wear and tear miles add up as these horses start aging. And the vet had kind of an offhanded remark in saying, it's amazing how much adrenaline can cover up. And this triggered the gal's thinking process, and she reached out to me in sort of connecting the dots, if you will, and starting to say, you know, despite this horse now being in way better shape than when she first got him years ago, him being in a much better place mentally and soft and not biting and not anticipative and not pushy and not chaotic as would be expected of him from his past owners or people who interacted with him, he actually physically was deteriorating, and he wasn't moving as, quote, soundly as he used to. And so she was really pondering out loud that how much of the time are people doing things with their horses that are not okay, and yet the horse seems to be complying, and really the physical state that the horse is in this hyper anticipative and, we'll say, you know, adrenaline rush, constant high. And that when those endorphins are released, that it makes the horse's movement look like maybe they're more sound or more able or more physically capable than they actually are. And she was asking me if this was something that I had seen, or, you know, my thoughts on this and that sort of thing. And yeah, I see this all the time. I see so many horses that are physically not okay. I see so many horses that are mentally not okay. And, you know, the follow-up discussion, which came up at a recent clinic and some other scenarios where I was teaching, was what would it take for the human to acknowledge how many horses are not okay? Meaning they're not actually sound, they're not actually in a mentally present, safe state, and they are constantly anticipative, they're constantly avoidant. When we think of all the normalized chaotic horse behaviors, how much of the time do we normalize it, or do we justify it, or do we explain it away, or do we not address it because it's more convenient to do that than to have to stop and go back and look at the foundation and search for the holes that is missing in our communication to the horse that is creating these fearful, defensive, anticipative responses that stay with the horse even during all the times that we're not actually interacting with the horse. So some thoughts before I hit the road.